Okay, so how secure are the systems, the invisible ones, that power our digital lives? We're diving into API security.
Right.
APIs, those behind-the-scenes messengers that let apps and websites talk to each other. Like, think about it. Every time you order food online
Yeah.
or check your bank balance, APIs are quietly working their magic.
It's fascinating how much we rely on these hidden systems
Right.
without even realizing it. But here's the thing. They're not always as secure as we might think.
No. I mean, look at that massive Equifax data breach a few years back.
Right.
A misconfigured API was a major culprit, right?
Yeah.
Exposed the personal data of millions of people. And Gartner predicts that API abuse is going to become the most common attack vector leading to data breaches.
It is.
Pretty scary thought.
Yeah, and we're going to be diving into a presentation by Harish Kumar from Google Cloud. He delivered this at an API conference in Hong Kong, and he breaks down the API security landscape in a way that even I can understand.
Okay, so what are the biggest threats that we need to be aware of?
Well, Harish starts by highlighting the different groups involved in API security. You have the users, the app developers,
Right.
the API teams themselves, and then the backend systems storing all that valuable data. Each of these groups has its own security concerns.
So it's not just about, hackers trying to break in.
Not at all. For example, you as a user might fall victim to a phishing attack where someone tricks you into sharing your login credentials.
Okay.
That's a user-level security issue. But then you have app developers who need to make sure that their code is secure and free of vulnerabilities. And then the API teams need to worry about things like authentication and authorization, so making sure that only the right people can access the right data.
It sounds like there's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
What are the biggest threats that companies are facing right now?
Surprisingly, it's often not the super sophisticated hacking techniques that keep IT execs up at night. The top three threats, according to Harish, are misconfigured APIs, outdated APIs, and attacks by bots.
So wait, so it's often basic oversights that cause the biggest problems.
And the crazy thing is, misconfigured APIs are the primary cause of attacks.
Oh, wow.
So it really highlights the importance of getting the basics right.
So how do we fix this? I mean, what can we do to protect these vulnerable APIs?
Well, Harish suggests API management products as a potential solution.
Okay.
They act like tireless security guards, constantly monitoring your systems for weaknesses and suggesting ways to improve your security posture.
Okay, so instead of manually checking for vulnerabilities all the time, these tools are automated security experts working 24/7.
Right. They can help with continuous monitoring and improvement, which is essential because the digital landscape is constantly evolving.
So what exactly can these tools do? Can you give me some concrete examples?
Sure. So they come with features like security profiles and can even score your API configurations based on their security level. This means they can not only spot potential problems, but also tell you how to fix them.
That's pretty useful.
Yeah.
So what kinds of specific actions can these tools take to actually prevent threats?
They can enforce policies like requiring OAuth for authentication, which adds an extra layer of security.
Okay.
They can block traffic from known malicious sources, kind of like a virtual bouncer for your API.
I like that.
And they can enforce mutual TLS with backend systems.
Okay.
Which is requiring both sides of the conversation to present valid IDs to make sure they are who they say they are.
So we've got these security guards in place.
Yeah.
But what about those bots you mentioned earlier? How do we deal with those?
So bots can be tricky. Imagine an army of automated programs designed to exploit or disrupt your API.
Yep.
They can be used for all sorts of malicious activities, from spamming to scraping sensitive data to launching denial of service attacks.
So how do we stop them? It sounds like we need some pretty advanced technology to even detect them, let alone prevent them from doing damage.
That's where real-time traffic analysis comes in.
Okay.
Think of it like a high-tech surveillance system constantly monitoring the flow of data to and from your API.
Okay.
This is where AI and machine learning come into play. They can be trained to spot unusual patterns and flag potentially malicious behavior.
So it's like having a superpower detective who can analyze mountains of data and identify the bad guys before they can do any damage.
Exactly. But not all bots are created equal.
Right.
Some bots, like scrapers, are designed to steal valuable content from your website.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
They can really damage a business if they manage to steal proprietary data.
Absolutely. And that's where organizations like OWASP come in.
OWASP. What's that?
They help companies understand and mitigate these risks.
Okay.
OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project.
Okay.
They're a nonprofit that's dedicated to making applications and APIs more secure. Okay. One of their most valuable resources is the OWASP POP 10, which lists the most critical security risks for APIs.
So it's like a cheat sheet for developers and security teams, highlighting the most common vulnerabilities and offering guidance on how to fix them.
Exactly. And Harish's presentation actually dives into a few of these OWASP threats that are particularly impactful.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the, scariest ones?
One that really stood out to me is broken object level authorization.
That sounds pretty technical.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean?
Basically, it means that attackers can trick the system into letting them see or change information that they shouldn't have access to.
Okay.
Imagine having a key card that gets you into a building,
Right.
but then using that same key card to try to access restricted areas you're not authorized to enter.
I see. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Makes it much easier to understand.
Another major vulnerability on the list is broken user authentication. This basically means weak authentication practices, which can allow attackers to impersonate legitimate users and gain unauthorized access to systems and data.
That's terrifying. So this highlights the importance of strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, right?
Absolutely. It's like
Okay.
adding an extra lock on your door.
Okay.
With multi-factor authentication, even if someone steals your password, they'll still need another piece of information, like a code sent to your phone, to actually get in.
Makes sense. Okay, so what other API nightmares do we need to worry about?
Another common vulnerability is excessive data exposure,
Okay.
which occurs when APIs reveal more information than they need to.
Okay.
Think about all those apps on your phone that ask for access to your location, contacts, or camera.
Right.
Are they really using all that data, or are they exposing more than necessary?
That's a great point. I've never really thought about it that way before.
It's something we all need to be more aware of.
Yeah.
And the last threat we'll cover in this section is lack of resources and rate limiting.
Okay, can you explain that one in a way that even I can understand?
Sure. It's about setting limits on how much an API can be used.
Okay.
Failing to do so can lead to denial of service attacks, where attackers overwhelm the system with requests, causing it to crash or become unavailable to legitimate users. Imagine a restaurant suddenly flooded with 1 million orders it can't handle.
Yeah.
That's basically what a denial of service attack does to an API.
Okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
So it's like a traffic control system for your API,
Exactly.
making sure it doesn't get overwhelmed and crash.
And there are specific strategies and techniques for implementing these protections,
Right.
which we can dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so we covered some pretty scary stuff in that first part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've talked about misconfigured APIs, bot attacks, and those top OSB vulnerabilities. But I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Like everywhere I look, there's another potential threat lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it can feel that way, especially when you're first learning about API security.
Yeah.
But the good news is that there are ways to protect ourselves and our data.
Okay, that's reassuring. So where do we go from here? Like, what are some of the key strategies for mitigating these risks?
Well, Harish actually talks about a few essential strategies in his presentation.
Right.
And they're all about building a more robust and resilient API ecosystem.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is called data minimization.
Data minimization. So less is more when it comes to data.
You got it. It's about only exposing the bare minimum data that's absolutely necessary for the API to function. Think of it like a chef who only reveals the most delicious part of a dish, keeping all the secret ingredients hidden away.
Makes sense. Less data you expose, the less there is to steal. What else can we do?
We've already touched on this, but it's worth emphasizing again. Strong authorization and authentication. This is about making sure that only the right people have access to the right data and resources. It's like having multiple layers of security, like a high security vault. You need the right credentials, the right permissions, maybe even a fingerprint scan to get in.
Yeah, I get why strong authentication is important.
Yeah.
But isn't multi-factor authentication kind of a pain for users?
Yeah.
Is there like a trade-off between security and convenience?
That's a good point. There's always a balance to strike.
Right.
But with the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks, that extra layer of security is becoming more and more essential.
Okay.
And a lot of companies are doing a better job of making multi-factor authentication more user-friendly.
That's good to hear. What about rate limiting? That was another strategy Harish mentioned, right?
Yes, absolutely. Rate limiting is like a traffic control system
Right.
for your API.
Mm-hmm.
It helps prevent denial of service attacks by limiting how often someone can make requests to your API.
Okay.
Think of it like speed limits and traffic lights.
Right.
On a busy highway, they help prevent gridlock and accidents.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So we have strong doors, multiple locks,
Yeah.
and traffic control in place. What else do we need to complete our API security fortress?
One more crucial element, robust logging and monitoring.
Okay.
This is about keeping a close eye on your APIs, tracking what's happening, and looking for any signs of suspicious activity. Imagine a network of security cameras and watchful guards constantly analyzing data, searching for any anomalies that could indicate an attack.
So it's like having a 247 security team on high alert, ready to respond to any threats.
Exactly. Logging provides the evidence, while monitoring helps us interpret that evidence and take action before it's too late.
Got it. Okay. This is all starting to make sense now. It's like building a fortress to protect our APIs with multiple layers of defense.
You got it. And just like a fortress, every component needs to be strong and secure.
Okay, so we've talked about some like general strategies for protecting APIs.
Right.
But I'm curious, are there any like specific tools or technologies that companies are using to actually implement these strategies?
Yes, definitely. And one that Harish highlights in his presentation is API management platforms.
Okay.
They provide a centralized way to manage and secure APIs, and they often come with built-in features for authentication, authorization, rate limiting, logging, and monitoring.
So they're like a multi-tool for API security.
Exactly.
Providing all the essential features in one convenient package.
They can help streamline security processes, enforce consistent policies, and provide valuable insights into API usage and performance.
That sounds pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I'm starting to understand why these platforms are becoming so popular.
They are, and many of them leverage cloud-based technologies, which offer scalability, flexibility, and cost-effectiveness. Plus, cloud providers like Google Cloud have robust security measures built into their infrastructure, providing an extra layer of protection for your APIs.
That's good to know. So it sounds like API security is a complex and ever-evolving challenge.
Yeah.
But with the right strategies, tools, and mindset, we can build a more secure and resilient digital future.
Absolutely. It's all about staying informed, being proactive, and never underestimating the importance of API security.
Well, speaking of staying informed, we still have a few more threats to uncover from that OWASP top 10 list.
We've only covered 4 of the top 10 so far.
Right.
And the next one on our list is called security misconfiguration.
Security misconfiguration. That sounds a bit vague. What exactly does it entail?
It's often a result of misplaced trust.
Okay.
Administrators and developers sometimes assume that the systems they're using are inherently secure right out of the box.
Yeah.
They rely on default configurations, make partial configurations that leave gaps, or even store data in the cloud without implementing proper security controls. It's like leaving your front door unlocked because you live in a safe neighborhood.
Yeah, you're just asking for trouble.
Exactly. And in the digital world, a misconfigured security setting can be all it takes for an attacker to slip through the cracks.
So what are some common examples of security misconfigurations?
Well, one common mistake is leaving unnecessary features or services enabled.
Okay.
It's like leaving a spare key under the mat. You're just giving attackers more opportunities to exploit your system.
Right.
Another common issue is using default passwords or weak passwords.
Okay.
It's like having a lock on your door that anyone can pick with a bobby pin.
Okay, so we need to be extra vigilant about our security settings and make sure we're not leaving any obvious vulnerabilities open. But how do we even know what to look for? It sounds like there are a lot of potential pitfalls.
There are, and that's where API management platforms can be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
They can automate security checks, scan for common misconfigurations, and even recommend specific actions to improve your security posture.
So they're like those meticulous organizers who come in and make sure everything is in its right place, labeled correctly, and secured tightly.
And many platforms use pre-built security templates and best practices.
Right.
So you don't have to start from scratch.
Okay, so we've got our settings locked down tight, and we're using API management platforms to help us stay on top of things. What other dangers lurk in the API jungle?
The next vulnerability we'll tackle is injection.
Injection.
Which is a classic attack vector.
It sounds a bit like something out of a medical drama. What does it have to do with APIs?
Well, Imagine slipping a fake ingredient into a recipe
Okay.
to sabotage the dish or steal the chef's secret formula.
Okay.
That's kind of what an injection attack does. It involves injecting malicious data into an API request, hoping to trick the system into doing something it shouldn't.
Okay, so what kind of malicious data are we talking about?
Attackers might try to inject things like malicious SQL code, JavaScript snippets, or other harmful data that can disrupt the system or expose sensitive information.
And how do they actually DO that? Where do they inject this data?
They can target various entry points like input fields, parameters, or even integrated services that communicate with the API.
So they're constantly probing for weaknesses,
Exactly.
trying to find any crack in the armor.
And they can be quite clever about it. They might analyze the source code, use vulnerability scanners, or even employ fuzzing techniques
Right.
where they bombard the API with random inputs to see if anything breaks.
So how do we defend against these sneaky injections?
The key is to implement strict input validation and sanitation.
Okay.
We need to define clear rules about what types of data are allowed, enforce limits on input length, and sanitize inputs to remove any potentially harmful characters.
So it's like having a meticulous bouncer at the door,
That's a great analogy.
checking IDs, enforcing dress codes,
Yeah.
and making sure no one sneaks in anything dangerous.
And API gateways can also act as a first line of defense, checking incoming requests to ensure they conform to predefined schemas and data types.
Right.
They can even transform inputs to remove risky sequences and replace them with safe values.
So it's like having a sophisticated filter
Yeah,
that automatically removes any impurities
right.
from the data before it reaches the core of the system.
And here's another layer of protection that can be really helpful: data lock prevention policies.
Oh, yeah?
Often offered by cloud providers like Google.
Right.
They can help identify and block sensitive data from leaving the system.
So it's like having a watchful guardian constantly scanning for any signs of data leakage and quickly plugging the holes.
And these data loss prevention policies can be customized to meet the specific needs of your organization
Okay.
and the types of data you handle.
Okay, so we've got strong defenses against misconfigurations and injections. We're locking down our settings, validating inputs, and even using AI-powered tools to monitor for suspicious activity. What else do we need to worry about?
Well, the next vulnerability on the OWASP list might seem a bit less glamorous, but it's equally important: insufficient logging and monitoring.
Wait, logging and monitoring?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty boring compared to those other exciting attacks we've been discussing.
But trust me, it's crucial. Without proper logging and monitoring,
Yeah?
attacks can go undetected, allowing attackers to wreak havoc while remaining hidden in the shadows.
So it's like having a security system with no cameras or alarms. You might get robbed
Yeah.
without ever knowing it happened.
Logging provides a detailed record of all activities happening within your API ecosystem.
Okay.
It's like having a meticulous record keeper who documents every transaction, every access attempt, every error,
Yeah.
and every suspicious event.
So it's like having a black box recorder for your APIs, capturing everything that happens,
Yeah.
just in case you need to investigate an incident later on.
And monitoring takes it a step further by analyzing those logs in real time, looking for patterns, anomalies, and anything that might indicate an attack in progress.
Okay.
Think of it as a team of vigilant security analysts constantly watching those security camera feeds, looking for any signs of trouble.
So logging provides the evidence,
Exactly.
and monitoring helps us interpret that evidence
Right.
and take action before it's too late.
And it's not just about detecting attacks. Logging and monitoring can also help you understand how your APIs are being used, identify performance bottlenecks, and improve overall system efficiency.
So it's like having a fitness tracker for your APIs,
Yes, I like that.
providing valuable insights into their health and performance.
It's a great way to think about it.
Okay, I'm convinced. Logging and monitoring might not be the most glamorous aspects of API security, but they're definitely crucial. But how do we actually implement effective logging and monitoring?
Right.
What are the key things we need to consider?
First and foremost, you need a clear policy that defines what you're going to log, how much detail to capture, how long to keep those logs, and how you're going to protect them from tampering or unauthorized access.
So it's like having a set of rules and procedures for handling evidence at a crime scene,
You got it.
ensuring its integrity and admissibility in court.
You also need to think about centralized log management. Instead of having logs scattered across different systems, it's much more efficient and secure to collect them in a central repository.
So it's like having a central library
Precise.
where all the important historical records are carefully archived and preserved.
This makes it much easier to search, analyze, and correlate logs from different sources.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And of course, we need tools and systems that can effectively monitor those logs in real time.
Absolutely. You need systems that can handle large volumes of log data, parse it efficiently, identify patterns, and trigger alerts when suspicious activity is detected.
So it's like having a team of expert detectives working around the clock, sifting through mountains of data looking for clues that could lead to the arrest of those pesky API attackers.
And just like detectives, these monitoring systems need to be constantly learning and adapting to new threats. That's where machine learning comes in.
Okay.
It can help automate threat detection, identify subtle patterns that humans might miss, and adapt to evolving attack techniques.
So it's like having a superpowered detective who can analyze data at lightning speed and connect the dots.
Yeah.
That would take humans hours or even days to figure out.
And with the right tools and strategies in place, we can transform those boring logs into a powerful weapon in our fight against API threats.
This has been an incredibly enlightening journey through the OWASP Top 10.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from misconfigurations and injections to the importance of logging and monitoring.
Yeah.
But we're not done yet. There's still a few more vulnerabilities on the list to explore.
You're right. We're just getting started. Are you ready to dive into the final part of our deep dive and tackle those remaining threats?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back and ready to finish our deep dive into API security.
Yeah.
We've already uncovered a lot of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, there's a jungle out there.
Lurking in that API jungle. But we still have a few more threats on that OWASP Top 10 list. I am ready to face them head on, though, armed with all the knowledge that we've gained so far.
That's the spirit. You're right. We've only covered 6 of the top 10 so far. But don't worry. We're going to equip you with the strategies and best practices you need to fortify your API defenses against these remaining threats.
Okay, I'm ready. What's up next?
Next on our list is a vulnerability that sounds deceptively simple. Broken function level authorization.
Broken function level authorization. Can you break that down for me?
Sure.
What does function level authorization even mean?
Think of your API as a building with different rooms, each representing a specific function or action that the API can perform. Authorization is like having key cards that grant access to specific rooms.
I'm following you.
Okay.
So like if someone has a key card for the mailroom, they shouldn't be able to waltz into the executive suite.
Exactly. But with broken function level authorization, attackers might find ways to bypass those access controls and gain unauthorized access to sensitive functions.
Right.
It's like finding a master key that unlocks every door in the building, giving you free rein to snoop around where you shouldn't.
Scary thought.
Yeah.
So how do these attackers actually exploit this vulnerability?
They might try to exploit weaknesses in the authorization logic, manipulate parameters in API requests to try and trick the system, or even try to guess the URLs of hidden functions that they're not supposed to know about.
It sounds like they're really determined to get in. So how do we, stop them? What can developers do to prevent these kinds of attacks?
The key is to have a robust authorization mechanism that's properly designed and implemented. We need to ensure that each function has its own distinct set of permissions.
And that those permissions are consistently enforced across the entire API. It's like having a security guard posted at every door, carefully checking credentials and making sure only authorized personnel are allowed entry.
So I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's all about layers of security, right?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
And it's also important to remember the principle of least privilege.
Okay.
This means granting users only the minimum level of access they need to perform their tasks.
Right. Don't give everyone a master key.
Exactly.
Okay. What's the next vulnerability we need to tackle?
Next up is mass assignment.
Mass assignment. Okay, that one sounds a bit more technical.
Imagine filling out a form with a bunch of checkboxes and accidentally granting someone permission to change things they shouldn't.
Okay.
That's kind of what mass assignment is like. It occurs when an API allows users to update multiple fields or properties of an object in a single request, even if they're not authorized to modify all of them. So it's about setting boundaries and making sure people can only change the things that they're supposed to change.
Exactly. Imagine an API that lets you update your user profile.
Okay.
You might have fields for your name, email address, and even administrative privileges. If the API doesn't properly validate and sanitize the input, an attacker could manipulate the request to grant themselves admin rights. It's like sneaking in an extra checkbox on that form, hoping no one notices and accidentally grants you superpowers.
Sneaky. That sounds dangerous. So how do developers, prevent this from happening?
They need to be very careful about which fields they allow to be updated through mass assignment. They can implement whitelists that explicitly specify which fields are modifiable.
Okay.
And validate the input to make sure it conforms to the expected data types and values. It's like having a strict quality control inspector carefully examining every incoming package, rejecting anything that doesn't meet the specifications.
Okay, that's reassuring. Okay, we've got 2 more vulnerabilities to go. What's next on the list?
The next one is server-side request forgery.
Server-side request forgery. All right, break that down for me.
So imagine an attacker tricking a server into fetching a malicious file or accessing a restricted resource. It's like using a delivery service to unknowingly transport something dangerous.
Okay, that makes sense. I see where the forgery part comes in.
Yeah.
But how do attackers actually pull this off?
Well, they might exploit vulnerabilities in the API that allow them to manipulate the server's requests. For example, they could tamper with URLs, inject malicious code, or even leverage compromised user accounts to make the server do their bidding.
It sounds like a pretty sophisticated attack.
It can be. And the consequences can be severe. Attackers could steal sensitive data, disrupt services, or even gain control of the entire system.
So how do we protect ourselves from these server-side shenanigans? What are the best defenses against this kind of forgery?
The key is to sanitize all user input, validate requests rigorously, and carefully restrict the server's access to external resources. It's like having a super strict customs agent inspecting every incoming package for contraband and only allowing authorized goods to pass through.
Okay, that makes sense. We need to be extra cautious about what we allow our servers to fetch and execute. All right, so we've covered 9 of the OWASP top 10. What's the last one?
The last vulnerability on our list is improper assets management.
Improper assets management. That sounds pretty broad. What exactly does it encompass?
Think of it like having a detailed inventory system for your API, tracking every piece of equipment, every tool, every spare part, making sure they're all in good working order. It's about keeping track of all the components, dependencies, and resources that make up your API ecosystem.
So it's like knowing what you have, where it is, and who has access to it.
It involves identifying all your APIs, documenting their functionality, managing their versions, and ensuring they're properly secured. Without proper asset management, you can easily lose track of things, and that can create all sorts of security risks.
What kind of risks are we talking about?
Well, one risk is ending up with outdated and vulnerable APIs that are no longer supported. Another risk is the emergence of shadow APIs.
Shadow APIs. That sounds kind of spooky.
Yeah.
What are those?
Shadow APIs are essentially undocumented or unauthorized APIs that fly under the radar. They might be created by developers for testing or as quick workarounds, but then forgotten about and left exposed, creating potential security vulnerabilities. It's like having secret passageways hidden within a building that no one officially knows about, but that attackers could potentially discover and exploit.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so besides shadow APIs, what other problems can arise from improper asset management?
Version control can also be an issue. If different teams are working on different versions of an API without proper coordination, it can create inconsistencies and vulnerabilities. It's like having multiple teams working on different blueprints for the same building without talking to each other. You might end up with doors that lead nowhere, rooms that overlap, and a whole lot of confusion.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. So how do we prevent these issues? What does good asset management actually look like?
Organizations need to implement robust asset management practices. They need a central inventory of all their APIs,
Okay.
clear documentation of their functionality, and a system for tracking versions and enforcing security policies consistently across all of them.
Yeah.
It's like having a master architect who oversees the entire project,
Right.
ensures that everyone is working from the same blueprints, and that the final building is structurally sound and secure.
That makes a lot of sense. We've covered all 10 of the OWASP top 10 API vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway, for our listeners? What's the one thing that they should remember from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that API security isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process. It requires a multi-layered approach that combines secure coding practices, robust authentication and authorization mechanisms, vigilant monitoring, and a culture of security awareness throughout your organization.
So it's like building a fortress,
Exactly.
constantly reinforcing its walls,
Yeah.
updating its defenses, and training its guards to be ever vigilant against new and evolving threats.
And just like a fortress, the strength of your API security depends on the weakest link. Every component, every setting, every line of code
Right.
needs to be carefully considered and secured.
So we need to be proactive, stay informed, and never underestimate the importance of API security.
Absolutely.
It's not something we can just ignore and hope for the best.
But remember, the OWASP Top 10 is just a starting point.
Right.
There are tons of other resources and best practices out there to help you build secure and resilient APIs. Don't be afraid to explore, experiment, and keep learning.
That's great advice. And we'll be sure to include links to some of those resources in the show notes for this episode. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into API security. I learned a lot. Thanks for guiding us through this.
It's been my pleasure. It's a complex topic, but hopefully we've helped shed some light on it. And remember, folks, stay vigilant. The API landscape is constantly evolving, so it's important to stay informed and proactive about security. Until next time, may your APIs be ever secure.
Yeah, thanks for listening.